Woohoo, we are live. This is Math 75, section 2.1. We're starting chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a nice little review of quadratics and parabolas. And the expectation here is that you have, in fact, already studied this. So if this is the first time that you are learning about quadratics, then you will need more than what I'm telling you here. So, having said, giving you that warning, let's go ahead and do some problems. This first section is just about solving quadratics. 2.2 will be graphing. So first we're going to go with the solutions. And the first thing I should do is just remind everyone what is a quadratic equation. And the easiest way to show you is standard form, well, modified standard form. It's a polynomial equation where we have an x squared, and that's considered quadratic. And in this case, a should not be 0. I don't need to be like, oh, it's actually a line. This is actually looking at expressions and equations involving x squared. But these are polynomials, so they're fairly well behaved. And the first thing we're going to talk about is reminding everyone how to solve quadratic equations. Quadratic equations can be either factored or you can use the quadratic formula. So in order to solve, the first thing that you got to know is identify that the problem is quadratic. And in fact, this really is. I'm going to bring us in a little bit. And let me see if I can up the sharpness of this a little bit. I'm still having trouble. My webcam is only partially working right now, but we're going to get through this. This says x squared equals 11x minus 10. First thing to remember is that, as I did here, as a reminder, you need to set the quadratic expression equal to 0. So everything basically has to be on the same side. So I've got x squared equals 11x minus 10. First thing I'm going to do is move 11x and 10. Now, I'm saving space by doing it all at once. I don't know if you've seen me do this before. You don't have to use two terms. You can add or subtract pretty much anything to both sides of an equation, as long as you're balanced about it. You can load it all up into one single step. So remember that when you move stuff around, the signs change. So I've got x squared minus 11x plus 10. Factoring is when you break the quadratic expression or the quadratic function down into, usually what we're going for is two binomials. If we look at this and we see a common factor, like if 2 went into all these, we'd factor that out as well. But in this case, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for two numbers. And hopefully this kind of jogs your memory. Again, I am not going to review how to do the factoring. So if you are not remembering how to factor, like this is your first time ever, talk to me. We'll find some resources for you. This is assuming you have already been through some algebra, so you do know how to factor this. So I start off with x and x, and this is going to give me that x squared. And then I look to the 10 and I think, okay, I need two numbers, which when multiplied give me 10, but when added, give me this number in the middle, the negative 11. And I think, oh, negative 1 and negative 10. Negative 1 times negative 10 is positive 10. Negative 1 plus negative 10 is negative 11. Woohoo! So now that I've taken the quadratic and I've factored it into two linear binomials, so in other words, two binomials that just have x's in it, I use something called the zero property, which is one of my favorite things in the world to say. If these two things multiplied equal 0, the only way to get there was that one of them was 0. Oh no, I'm running out of ink. Oh, I'm running out of ink very rapidly. Let's see. Aha! Let's see what color this is. So my two answers up here, ooh, black. X equals 1 or x equals 10. Those are our two possibilities, so that x squared equals 11x minus 10. And we could also check this if we wanted to by plugging in. For example, if I check x equals 1, over here, 1 squared is 1. 11 times 1 is 11 minus 10 is 1. Both sides check. 10, a little bit harder. 10 squared is 100. 11 times 10 is 110 minus 10 is 100. Both sides are equal. Okay, so we're going to stay focused on finding the answers and not checking. But if you have questions about checking, please let me know. Wonder, 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 wonder. Okay, now we've got another problem. 3x squared minus 4x equals 2. And again, the first trick will be to recognize this is quadratic. And this is quadratic because of the x squared. We've got the 3x squared there. So I'm going to move everything over to one side. You do not have to show me this step, but I know a lot of people should do this step to remember, when you move the 2, the sign actually changes. You're not just moving it, you're subtracting it from both sides. So we've got this situation set up, 3x squared minus 4x minus 2 equals 0. And so then we could sit down and go ahead and try to factor it. I know from teaching this class that there are a bunch of people who take this class who are amazing with factoring. They can factor any quadratic that's factorable. However, a lot of us are not as good as that. I have to admit, I take a long time to factor as well. So if you either suspect you have something that does not factor, or you think it might factor, but you're just not sure how to do it, you can always rely on the quadratic formula. Let me write it up here. Quadratic formula. And for this class, you really do need to have this memorized. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So if I have the standard modified standard form sitting right there, then I've got x equals the opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's the quadratic formula. We are going to use this a lot in this chapter. If you go into YouTube, well, you're already in YouTube right now. So if you stay in YouTube and you go ahead and you search for quadratic formula song, you will find it in many, 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 many different forms. You will find really homemade, corny ones. You'll see very fancy professional versions. You'll see all different songs adapted because this is universal. A lot of people have to memorize this, and it's a lot to memorize. The opposite of b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. But that has to be in your head. So let's go ahead and use it. So if I have 3x squared minus 4x minus 2 equals 0, I'm going to line it up against a, b, and c. So we've got it in descending order. A equals 3, b equals negative 4, and c equals negative 2. The next step is to use the formula. Oh boy, I know, I can hear everyone's very, very excited. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac. And some of you are saying, wait a minute, over 2a. You keep making us write this down. If we're following along, we're writing this down a million times. And the answer is, yep, a million is the best way to learn. I'm sorry, I can't talk and write at the same time. It's a fatal flaw of mine. Okay, so let's talk this over. It's the best way to learn a formula. So x equals the opposite of negative 4 plus or minus, and I'm sorry, this got a little squishy in there, negative 4, the quantity squared. Remember that the whole of b is squared, so that minus stays inside the parentheses. minus 4 times a times c. So 4 times 3 times -2 all over 2a. -4, the quantity squared is 16. 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 is 24, and it's positive 24 all over 6. Okay. And now we are going to get to one of my very, very, very favorite maths, which is bare math. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this problem right now, but the very next problem, the very next video will be an explanation of bare math to explain how I'm going to get this result. So I'm going to say C bare math video. It turns out this reduces to 2 radical 10. So some of you already know how to work with radicals. You've got the square root of 40, that's 4 times 10, and we squeeze the square root of 4 out, but that becomes 2. Then I'm going to factor out a 2, so I've got 2 plus or minus radical 10 all over 6, and that 2 can cancel. So I cancel the 6 with the 2, and I end up with 2 plus or minus radical 10 all over 3. Let me put that in there. Okay, woohoo. So the very next video will be bare math to explain how the heck we went from here to here. And then I will continue on after that with the rest of 2.1. Woohoo, we made it. Yay. Okay, next up is bare math.